I now recognize Representative Brian Mast of Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ma'am, and congratulations on your appointment. I want to start with, I want to continue on with what many have been speaking about the Human Rights Council and just ask an opinion question. In your opinion, is the Human Rights Council an anti-Semitic institution?
I think that there are individual countries in the Human Rights Council that are anti-Semitic.
Which ones?
I don't want to call them out, but I think we've seen that the Human Rights Council, you've seen the actions of countries in the Human Rights Council.
If somebody was racist, we would say they are racist. So I would ask you again, which nations would you say are anti-Semitic?
We've seen that countries that have put Israel on the agenda on a regular basis have expressed views that are anti-Semitic, and many of those countries are in the Middle East. I work with them, and I work with them on a number of issues.
Would you say the High Commissioner for the Human Rights Council,
I would
Ms.
not.
Michelle Bachelet?
No, I would not say that she's anti-Semitic.
Okay. All right. So I want to move on from that point. Are you familiar with the Human Rights Council Resolution S-30/1, ensuring respect for international human rights laws and international humanitarian law in the occupied Palestinian territory?
Yes.
Okay. In that, and I don't expect you to know every single line of it, it's an unreasonable expectation. Section G of that specifically says, do not aid or assist in the commission of internationally wrongful acts. This means no sale of arms to Israel. That's what this is referring to. By that person, Ms. Michelle, the High Commissioner of the Human Rights Council, she spoke and wrote about this to quote her. Although Israel undertook a number of precautions, such as advance warning of attacks in some cases, airstrikes in such densely populated areas resulted in a high level of civilian fatalities and injuries, as well as a widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure. Such strikes raise serious concerns of Israel's compliance with the principles of distinction and proportionality under international humanitarian law. Paraphrasing a little bit further here, such attacks may constitute war crimes. That's what she spoke about this. Now, my follow-on would be this. Not selling to Israel has been reportedly brought forward by members of this committee, to include Ms. Omar and the chairman, based upon reports. So pending the outcome of that investigation, would you support not selling arms to Israel if that's how that investigation came out? The
Biden administration has been clear. Israel has a right to defend itself, and we support Israel's right to defend itself.
But if that's what the Human Rights Council called for, saying they committed crimes of war and they call for not selling arms to Israel, would you support that?
I don't think the U.S. Supported that resolution, and I will repeat again that we support Israel's right to defend itself against any attacks.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to move to some other comments that you made. You spoke several times in your opening statement and other times about your support for a two-state solution and the Biden administration's support for a two-state solution. A couple of weeks back, we had Secretary of State Blinken in here. He acknowledged outright that Hamas would probably win an election if Abbas allowed elections to be held. They would become the governing body. This was also acknowledged by a person I just referenced, Ms. Bachelet, the High Commissioner for the Human Rights Council, said in this same speech that I just quoted, Hamas is the de facto authority in the Gaza Strip. So my question to you is this: why do you and the Biden administration support making a state out of what would become an elected terrorist government? That's really not disputed. They're the de facto power there. They would win election if an election occurred. So why would we support making a state out of what would become a terrorist-run government?
What we support is the rights of the Palestinian people to live in peace and security in their own state, and the rights of Israel to have security in its own state. And that right is the right of Israel to defend itself.
But why would we support making a state out of what would be a terrorist-run government?
The Secretary of State
has acknowledged this. Secretary of State acknowledged that they run it. Does
I can
somebody
only
other
say
than
that
Hamas
we-
run
Yeah.
Gaza?
Good. I can only say that we support the rights of the Palestinian people, and we do not support Hamas, and we've been clear that we do not support.
Who would vote for a terrorist government? I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.